This is the Gamdias Neso P1, a case that for once has a naming scheme that everybody can understand. As you can see, we have here the fully black version in-house, and how Gamdias is doing things, we got a separation for the color of the interior mainboard panel and another one for the top and bottom parts of the case. Hence, there is a white-white, black-white, fully black and black-red version. It's funny how an easy understandable naming scheme can make script writing so much easier and a much more positive experience. Anyway, let's get to the case because we got a ton to cover. The Gamdias Neso P1 comes in a pretty regular package with slightly thicker carton and protected by a plastic bag and some of that nicer styrofoam. To get to the additional box of goodies hidden inside of the case, we first need to open it up. For that, just click the release button and use the little Neso P1 strap to open the swivelable tempered glass side panel. And while we are at it, keep the release button pressed to also open the front tempered glass side panel, including the metal bracket that separates the two. And yes, thanks to having access to basically the complete front of the case from every angle, building inside this thing is incredibly easy. But let's first try to cover the compatibility before we get to the cool stuff. Even if the carton that the case comes in is square, the case itself actually isn't square at all. Standing on the table, the P1 is 550mm high and 312mm wide. For the depth, let's say, the right side is about 495mm deep, while the left side is roughly 445. So you got that trapezoid. Yes, I needed to Google how to pronounce that.
Trapezoid.
You got that trapezoid form going on. Of course, this doesn't change a thing about the case's usability or compatibility. It's just a little design aspect that you need to keep in mind in case you got a square OCD issue. But it does look kinda cool. On that matter, you are not restricted to this form factor, because what you can do is remove the feet at the bottom of the case, remove the rubber placeholders on the right side panel, and exchange the two, allowing you to properly lay the case on its back without creating any air restriction for the fan. And of course creating a completely different design for your desk. Just don't use the case as a coffee table. It's not a mug heater. Get yourself one on Amazon. But let's finally cover the actual specs. Up to 80x motherboards. Wow, that was kind of boring, but I promise you from now on it's going to be much more interesting. As for CPU air coolers, the Neso P1 can house coolers that are up to 193mm high, which means everything. The Neso P1 can house pretty much everything. And the same goes for the GPU. Up to 420mm long cards can be installed in here, which again covers completely everything. But it's not only everything, it's everything in every direction. Because thanks to the ridiculous 200mm of space in between the motherboard compartment and the side panel, there is absolutely no issue with any GPU connectors that are out right now. So neither the GPU nor the air coolers will have any problem to fit into this one. However, it's the fans and water cooling support that kinda shocked me. On the side of the case, we are looking at either 3120s or 3140mm fans. And thanks to the up to 80mm of space in between the bracket and the bottom side, we are looking at a fully sized 420mm radiator with fans on that side. And not even the thin one. 25mm for the fans would allow you to mount an up to 55mm thick radiator. So even things like an Arctic liquid freezer 420 will fit in here, which is kinda cool. The next few fan spots are hidden below the top cover. To remove that one, simply stick your finger into the hole in the back and pull up. On that note, this cover looks incredibly good, and thanks to the integrated dust filter, it also gives you some protection on that end. But what I actually want to get into is build quality. It's attached using these rubber click-in knobs, which is much more enjoyable than the old method that was used to glue front panels to a case. You remember like or they are still used a lot on budget cases, but you got like these plastic clips which were amazing. The other thing is, it is heavy AF. Like, it has a bit of a wobble going because it's entirely made out of plastic, but it's heavy plastic. The only thing that will at some point annoy you is that this isn't really cleanable. A removable dust filter would have been a much better choice here. You can still try your luck with compressed air or, I don't know, a toothbrush, but it's not going to be an easy thing. But still, top-notch build quality for the entire piece. Back to the fans. Using this removable bracket, we can fit another 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans, or a 360 or 280mm radiator. For the placement, you can choose whether you want to mount the fans inside or at the bottom side of the bracket. By default, I would always just put them inside, because that gives me much more space in the bottom for example, the CPU power cable, and you won't lose as much if you add a radiator, like a radiator 27mm plus fan, and suddenly you have a thick block here. So putting the fans inside or the radiator inside could help you a lot with space inside of the case. In the bottom, we got a very similar situation inside the exact same panel. The only difference here is that there is no bracket that is removable. Therefore, the two 140 or three 120mm fans are being mounted to the permanently attached bracket using radiator type screws from the bottom. But don't panic, because Gamdias includes those in the bag of goodies. And at the same time, this takes away any radiator support in the bottom, which you couldn't do anyway because there is not really a good way to get to the screw holes from the top. And to finish off the usual spots, we got another 120 or 140mm spot with a potential radiator placement in the back. And thankfully, this is a real 140mm spot. It's not like a 120 with additional holes that cover everything a 140 brings to the table. No, it's a real 140mm spot that can be fully utilized. Let's now focus on the back side of the case. Once the single screw in the back is removed, we can pop off the right side panel, which is attached using the same knob mechanic. Very enjoyable. And on that side, we got the same line design covering the complete panel, including a dust filter, which this time is actually removable, which makes the whole thing even more enjoyable. But this is what I call space. In here we got two pre-attached hard drive cages capable of holding onto two 3.5 inch or two 2.5 inch drives. But if you want to max this out, we can also use these side spots, because as you might have already seen on some of my previous B-rolls, the side mounted fan spots are already occupied by default. And by using these, we can mount 3 additional 2.5 inch drives. Of course, at the cost of a fan spot each. The PSU should be installed in here, and according to the spec, the PSU can be up to 180mm long, which I believe is quite the huge underestimation. It takes you up to 290mm until you start hitting stuff. So let's say 220 while taking potential cables and cable extensions and everything else into account, maybe even a bit more. But if you don't want to squeeze any stuff, I would say with 220 you are definitely still on the safe side. And to finish off the back, we got this seemingly random piece of metal, which actually isn't random at all. Gamdias lovely described this as a control box plate, and that's actually just a piece of metal where you can use screws, glue, magnetic strips, or I don't know, cable, zip ties to attach a ARGB or fan controller to it. Seemingly unnecessary, but this can become very useful for cable management. Speaking of which, it's a treat. Thanks to how this whole thing is designed and built, the cable management is as easy as it gets. You've got a pair of enormous holes above the motherboard for CPU power and fans, and 2 rubberized side entries for your USBs and 24-pin. And these two make half the design of the finished build. Pair these with some colored and braided cables and you got an amazing design by default. Really, really great. And from the front I/O, we got another unexpected treat, because the bottom fan spot is actually below the case. So you'll have no issue to work on them. Sure, the GPU might still be in your way, like in my example here, I have it vertically, so that's a huge issue if you want to play with it after the fact. But if your GPU is mounted normally, the effect is minimized. But compared to the regular case, this is so much easier. And pair all of these well thought through holes with a bunch of Velcro strips in the back and you got yourself a good time. So far I was very happy with the case, the layout of everything, the build quality, everything seemed to be on point. But then we came to the extra stuff, like the built-in vertical GPU mount, because we can unmount the whole PCIe compartment and rotate it to make the whole thing vertical. No extra stuff needed, with additional holes and standoffs in case you want to screw down your riser, and the only thing you need to bring is your own riser. But the coolest thing about this is that you can push the GPU to the very back of the case, allowing the GPU to breathe as much as possible, and pair that with the bottom mounted fans and your GPU will have an amazing time. In the box of goodies, which by the way comes in a surprisingly high quality cotton box for some reason, but inside that one we'll also find a bunch of little useful things like screws, zip ties and additional rubber placeholders in case you want to go into desk mode. But what you'll also find is this included GPU holder. And at this point I have to admit it took me way longer than I'd like to admit to figure out how to install this thing. Funnily enough, the screw holes for the two PCIe bracket positions, or for like the riser installation, do line up with the holes for the GPU anti-sag bracket, but they are placed in a spot that would just simply not make a lot of sense. No, how that thing is actually intended to work is to use these magnetic additions here found in the bag of goodies. Stick the glueable side to the bracket and whoosh, the whole thing attaches to the bottom of the case magnetically, wherever you need it to be. However, I would still advise you to somehow play with the position of the bracket to make at least one spot align with any of the four holes in the, let's say, front of the case. It's not necessary, but I wouldn't advise you to live on the little pressure that the GPU pushes on that thing alone, especially if you move your PC around. A single strong movement and the magnets can't keep up and the whole thing will come down. So add a simple screw, just one, will eliminate that issue entirely. You know, better be safe than sorry. And as the last few points, things I do not understand. What are these two holes here for? And why is there a rubberized hole going out in the back compartment? I mean, I kinda get the hole in the back. Maybe if you want to do external cooling, or in the very least it's very useful if you're using the case as like a testing setup where you need to route the internal cables outside, like for us for B-rolls for example. But the two holes in the top, no clue. But let's talk about the temps inside of this case. We filmed the build that you can see right here, and what we got is a 14600KF paired with a RTX 4090 from Zotac. And on top of everything, we got a Be Quiet Silent Loop 2 in 360 tuned with a bunch of light wings. Then in the bottom we got 3 additional light wings for intake and a Lightwing 140 in the back for exhaust. And let me tell you, that thing is cooled so damn well. To give you some temperature numbers, we reset everything back to stock enabled XMP and had firmware running in 4K all-in and Cinebench 24 in a loop. And the CPU was packed against that 5.3 GHz on the P-cores and 4 GHz on the E-cores whilst burning 160 watts through the package. And the GPU was sitting at a very cozy 55 degrees C, so that thing was not hot at all, not at all. And the hotspot temperature actually was 61 degrees C, so this is nearly like outside of the case level of performance. Then for the CPU, the hottest core never saw 90 degrees C in a Cinebench run. The max temperature was like 89 in one run. But overall, during a run, we were always just seeing temperatures about 83, 84, 82 degrees C. So the whole thing performed like a champ. And I opened the case up because here it is really freaking easy. I can just click the button, open the front, open the side, and we basically have like free air, at least for the CPU. And there was no difference. Closed or opened, I saw no difference, so the case really did its job. So where do we stand? I am significantly more happy with the Neso P1 than I would have thought based on the product images online. Sure, it didn't look bad, but it definitely looked a bit like somebody took some inspiration somewhere else. But that's not the point for today. I expected mediocre build quality and execution, as in like thought throughness. However, everything here is sturdy as hell, every panel is significantly thicker than you might believe, and the cable hole placement is just great. You got built-in stuff like the vertical GPU mounting, you got a giant hole to replace CPU backplates without removing everything, there is space for a full 420mm rad, fans all over the place, an included GPU anti-sag bracket, externally removable hard drive slots, easy access to everything, very easy to cable manage, a random plate just to hang fan controllers to it, and so on and so forth. Then there is also like life quality, like for example the top fan bracket, which is removable for easy installation. And somebody thought so much about this one that they actually lowered the fan area to a point where you can hide a rad inside of it, making it invisible. And all in all, it's these little things that made a very positive impression in my overall opinion. And as a whole, I wouldn't say that this is already on a Fantex or a Be Quiet Dark Base level of quality, but it is definitely not far away from there. But before I forget it, this one is located either in the bottom left of the case or the top left, depending on the orientation that you got. But there we got two USB 3.0 Type A's, one USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C and a combined audio in and out, next to a very clicky start button. So to summarize, the Gamdias Neso P1, a lot better than I expected. Given the unusual case design, it's definitely something different, but the execution is very good. You got a ton of customization options that you do not need to buy extra. But most importantly, it's a very good hybrid between air and water cooling. There are no restrictions for air coolers, and for water coolers, this would be even hard to achieve using a regularly shaped case. So you got basically everything what you could want. And something that made me very happy is about the side panels or the covers. Not only are they really thick and I really enjoyed the way they are mounted, but the whole thing is basically just one block that doesn't restrict any air. And even in areas where it doesn't matter, like everything around the hard drives or below the PSU could have been just blocked off. But no, in this case, they decided let's make the whole thing breathe for no freaking reason other than make sure that you can breathe. And for a price tag of 180 euros, I think they kept it in a relatively good spot. So from my side, it is definitely a recommendation. If you're looking for something quite unique on the desk, may it be laying flat or standing tall, this is definitely one of the more interesting candidates right now, and I personally really enjoyed building in this. But for today, this is going to be it for Gamdias and their Neso P1. At this point, a huge thank you to them for sending it over. And on a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And of course, we still have channel memberships, so if you're looking for a good way to sell your store for an RG poop emoji, that's a pretty good way to go. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but it will also serve to pay for a research team with the sole goal of finding out what these two holes are made for. There needs to be some sort of deeper reason. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at our take on another Gamdias product, the Boreas P1, which funnily enough also got P1 in the name, just like the case. No idea why, maybe there's a reason behind it, like their product number one, no clue. Anyway, hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.